So as you may or may not know, when I was in college, I had a chance to study abroad in Ecuador, and I was absolutely, positively terrified of the bus. Perched high in the Andes Mountains, Quito, the city I lived in, was at about 10,000 feet elevation and had the mountain roads to prove it. And I rode the bus every day to university and back. And whenever we would travel throughout the country, I would take the bus as well. And these buses would travel on these cliffside roads where they appeared not to have very many guardrails. And they also did not seem to have those double yellow lines that indicate that you should not pass. And so the bus would routinely pass in places that buses, cars, people, no one should be passing, right? And so I was pretty sure that I was going to die by careening off the edge of a cliff in a bus. Or, if that didn't happen, one of the roads would give way because there were often some sort of earthquakes or mudslides or something that roads would collapse. So I was pretty sure one of those two ways I was going to die. And so my solution was I had to take the bus, so I decided that I would ride the bus with my eyes closed. Because I figured that at least that way I would not see the things that we were doing, and I figured that I might stand a chance of getting a little being the key word, of peace in this midst of this bus ride, because my hands were perpetually sweaty, my heart was always racing, and whenever we got to my bus stop, my nerves were frayed, and I was just like, oh, thank God, I'm here. Now, alas, obviously, I made it safely each and every time, escaping death at the edge of a cliff by inches, I'm certain. Jesus also found himself at the edge of a cliff, driven out by the crowd of the synagogue. Now, if you were here last week, this story from today follows right on the heels of last week. So if you remember last week, Jesus sits down in the synagogue and starts to teach. He unrolls the scroll, he reads from Isaiah, and tells the people that we're supposed to bring good news to the poor, we're supposed to release the captives, we're supposed to let the oppressed be free. And the crowd at the end of last week seemed okay. Things were going pretty well. They had sort of welcomed him back to his hometown, and they were like, all right, we can do this. And then Jesus did a little more talking and stirred some things up in this crowd that caused them to say, isn't this Joseph's son? That carpenter guy from down the street? And this guy's sitting here in our synagogue and making us feel uncomfortable? He's sort of stirring up our comfortable little existence here. And so, out they went. And they led him right to the edge of the cliff, and they were ready to hurl him off. Did you hear that? Hurl him off the edge of the cliff. That would have made a good ending. But that's not what happened, right? So Jesus decides at the edge of the cliff to do the good and smart thing and shut his mouth, keep quiet, and just leave. Now, both Ecuador and the Jesus story from today take place on the edge of an actual cliff. But more often than not, the cliffs we find ourselves on are not actual cliffs, but more metaphorical cliffs. Cliffs where we might find ourselves engaged in some sort of life activity where our hands get a little sweaty and our heart starts to race a little bit and we start to feel a little bit uncomfortable, like we are just on the edge of something that's not quite safe. But what are these sort of metaphorical cliffs. Now, perhaps it's when we wrestle and come to grips with our own economic privilege that takes us to that place. Or perhaps when we come face to face with the reality that we have white privilege. Or perhaps it's when we start to do the hard work of advocating for transgender rights in the midst of a political climate that is not exactly making that the norm. Or perhaps we're working with undocumented folks and advocating for just immigration. Perhaps we're engaging with people of other faith traditions or no faith tradition and finding ourselves in an uncomfortable place. These are the sorts of cliffs that we can find ourselves on that isn't looking down thousands of feet and jumping, but nonetheless make our hands a little bit sweaty and our hearts start to beat a little bit faster and we start to get a little bit or a lot of bit nervous and anxious. That maybe this isn't such a good idea. That might just be the edge of the cliff that God calls us to. Not away from, but to. To work from, to love from. This is the first Sunday in February, and it is Black History Month. And just a couple weeks ago, we celebrated the birthday of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And as I was thinking about this, I came across this video that talks a little bit of how the Reverend Dr. King lived and worked on the edge of the cliff. Take a look.
Once upon a time, there's a man named Martin Luther King Jr. It's funny to think about because now we know his name so well, but at one time he was just a kid. Like maybe you're a kid watching this. Well, he was a kid too. Well, maybe you're a grown-up. That's okay too. Former kids are welcome here. I don't discriminate. Martin Luther King grew up to be a great man, of course, but things weren't all that great in the world while he was growing up. Not everybody was treated like they were somebody. And I believe that you should treat everybody like it's their birthday. But they didn't do that. People looked at the color of their skin. And that's how they decided if they were friends or not. Not cool, man. That didn't make him feel good. That didn't make anybody feel good. But his parents helped him grow up. He went to church. He learned about love. He grew up to be a minister to help a lot of people. He did all sorts of cool stuff. He helped a lot of people learn about love too. But still, he looked around and said, things should be better. He wanted to change things, so he did stuff. He decided, instead of spreading the hate, he would spread the love. He wanted to bring people together. Where people were hurting, he stepped in to help. He marched with them. He walked with them. He walked arm in arm with everyone. And sometimes it didn't go well, but he kept going. Sometimes he ended up in prison, but he kept going. Some people didn't like him, but he kept going. Some days were hard, but he kept going. Love does that, it just keeps going, even when things are dark. And, well, I don't like this part of the story, but things did get pretty dark. Someone who didn't agree with him shot him. He died in April 1968. Now, keep pressing it. Why are you telling us this sad story? Come on. I know. I'm sorry, but it happened. I don't like that happened. Now, I gotta tell you something. When things aren't awesome, it can be tough. And things won't always be awesome, but your response can be. Martin Luther King's response? It was awesome. Today, I just wanted us to think about this. Isn't it cool that we can change things? Like any of us, anybody. He dreamed and he changed things. And he dreamed and he kept sharing his dreams. They became not just his dream, a lot of people's dream. Like this one. I have a dream that little black boys and black girls will join hands with white boys and white girls and become sisters and brothers. That's a pretty good dream. Let's dream like that. That could change things.
Kid President reminds us that Dr. King did stuff to spread the love. He kept going when it was hard. When the edge of the cliff threatened to send him careening over, he instead kept going. Jesus didn't let the crowd throw him over the edge of the cliff. Instead, he kept going. He kept doing his thing, proclaiming God's realm, calling us to love our neighbors, love ourselves, love our enemies. So when we find ourselves getting close to the edge, to those scary places, our hearts might race. But that is probably the exact place God is calling us to be. So as Kid President said, be awesome. Spread the love. May it be so. Amen.